quiet farmer stops to help a city girl. He didn't know she was a billionaire's daughter. The desert stretched endlessly, golden and blinding under the midday sun. Not a single tree, no gas stations, just cracked earth and distant hills. Emily Carter stood beside her luxury SUV, one heel buried in the sand, mascara starting to smudge beneath her designer sunglasses. "Unbelievable," she muttered, glaring at the flat tire like it had insulted her. The touchscreen inside the car blinked with a low battery warning, and her phone showed zero signal. No bars, no service, no help. She had taken a detour from the main highway to avoid traffic, her brilliant idea to save time on the way to a spa weekend in Arizona. Now she was stranded somewhere between red dust and regret. Bointy! She kicked the tire, then hissed and stumbled, remembering too late she was wearing Italian heels. "Fantastic!" she said through clenched teeth. "Just fantastic!" In the distance, a faint hum broke the stillness. A small dust cloud followed the sound. Emily turned, shielding her eyes. A pickup truck, faded blue, dented along the side, rolled toward her like a mirage coming into focus. She straightened, brushing her skirt and slipping into a guarded stance. The truck came to a stop a few feet away, and the window rolled down. Behind the wheel sat a man in a dusty baseball cap, sleeves rolled up to sun-worn arms, his face shaded but calm. "You all right there, miss?" he asked, his voice rough around the edges but kind. Emily raised an eyebrow. "Do I look all right?" He didn't react to the tone. "Flat tire?" "No, I just enjoy standing in 100-degree heat for fun," she snapped, then paused, exhaling. "Sorry, yes, flat tire, and no signal." He nodded. "I'm Lucas. I live just over that ridge. Mind if I take a look?" She hesitated. He didn't look dangerous. Just dusty, annoyingly calm. "Fine, but this is a luxury vehicle. It's not whatever you're used to." Lucas gave a half smile. "Tires are tires." And with that, he stepped out of his truck, bent down by her car, and began to work. Quietly, methodically. Emily crossed her arms and watched, not knowing this moment would be the start of everything she never saw coming. Lucas crouched beside the SUV, inspecting the damaged tire with the ease of someone who had done this 100 times before. He didn't speak unless necessary, didn't gawk or joke. Just moved steadily, his hands calloused but careful. Emily leaned against the car door, arms folded, her expression caught between suspicion and curiosity. He wasn't what she expected out here. No country drawl, no awkward fumbling. Just calm, capable silence. "Looks like a nail caught it," he finally said, holding up the offending culprit. "Spare in the back?" She blinked. I think so. I've never actually." Lucas was already moving to the trunk. Within minutes, he had the spare out and tools ready. Emily watched as he wiped sweat from his brow and worked with a quiet rhythm. A breeze stirred the sand around them, and for the first time in hours, she didn't feel entirely helpless. Then, a rumble echoed across the open sky. Emily looked up. A wall of dark clouds was rolling in fast, heavy and low. The wind shifted, bringing with it the scent of impending rain. "You're not going to get far in this," Lucas said, standing. "Even with the spare," she frowned. "It's just rain. Out here, it's more than that. These roads turn to rivers in minutes." Emily glanced down the road, where the sky was already turning charcoal gray. "Let me guess. You're about to offer shelter in your log cabin in the woods?" He gave a small smile. "It's a cabin, not much of a log to it." She hesitated, chewing her lip. The smart thing was to say no, to wait it out in the car, to keep her distance. But the wind was picking up and her car beeped again. Low battery. "All right," she muttered. "Lead the way." Lucas turned down a gravel path, his old truck kicking up dust. Emily followed for a few minutes before the road became too muddy. With a sigh, she pulled over, grabbed her bag, and trudged after him on foot. Heels in hand, pride trailing somewhere behind. By the time they reached his cabin, the rain had broken open above them. Lucas held the door as she stepped inside, soaked, mascara running, hair flat against her face. "Charming," she muttered. Lucas handed her a dry towel. "Make yourself at home." It wasn't home. Not yet. But something about the smell of pine wood and old coffee grounds made her feel, for the first time in a long while, a little less lost. The cabin was small. One large room with a fireplace, a worn leather couch, and a modest kitchen tucked into the corner. There were no marble countertops, no touchscreen panels, and definitely no Wi-Fi password taped to the fridge. Emily stood awkwardly just inside the door, dripping water onto the wooden floor. Lucas disappeared into the back and returned moments later with a flannel shirt and sweatpants. "Here, dry clothes," he said, handing them to her. "Bathroom's down the hall." She stared at the bundle like it might bite her. "Thanks," she said stiffly, and vanished into the narrow hallway. When she emerged, hair damp and tucked behind her ears, makeup washed clean, she looked different, less like a glossy magazine cover and more like someone real. Lucas had already lit a fire and put a kettle on the stove. The warmth crept into the room slowly, chasing away the damp. Emily sank into the couch, arms wrapped around herself. "Do you always rescue stranded drivers in the rain?" Lucas smirked. "Only the ones who insult their own tires." She rolled her eyes but smiled faintly. "I wasn't exactly planning on detouring into the wilderness today." "I figured," he said, pouring hot water into 2 mismatched mugs. "Here, ginger and honey. Helps warm you up." She accepted the mug and stared into it like it held all the answers. "Let me guess. You grew the ginger and harvested the honey yourself?" He shrugged. "Actually, yeah." She blinked. "Of course you did." For a while they sat in silence. Rain tapped steadily against the windows, thunder rumbling low in the distance. Emily shifted on the couch, then spoke. "This place, it's like stepping back in time. No internet, no TV, no Uber Eats." Lucas stirred his tea, unfazed. "Got books. Got a fireplace. And the stars look better without streetlights." Emily scoffed. "You say that like it's a good thing." "Maybe it is." She didn't reply. Instead, she turned toward the fire, letting the quiet wrap around her. It wasn't comfort, yet, but it wasn't loneliness either. It was something in between, something unfamiliar. And when Lucas stood and quietly began chopping vegetables by hand for dinner, Emily didn't offer to help, but she watched. Closely. She wasn't ready to belong. But for the first time, she wasn't entirely trying to leave either. The rain hadn't let up by dinner. It came in steady sheets, like a curtain drawn across the forest beyond the cabin walls. Inside, the fire crackled softly, casting a warm orange glow across the room. Lucas had cooked a simple stew, vegetables, herbs, and something he called mountain spice that Emily swore must be just salt and pepper. Still, it smelled good, real, earthy. She ate it quietly, unsure whether to thank him or critique the lack of garnish. After dinner, she excused herself with a half smile and slipped onto the covered porch. The rain drummed on the tin roof, rhythmic and constant. She wandered a few steps from the door, phone in hand, hoping for just one bar of service. Miraculously, she found it. Near the fence, barely a signal. She dialed quickly. "Maddie?" she hissed when her friend picked up. "You would not believe where I am." Her voice rose, half a laugh, half an eye roll. "It's like some 1800s reenactment out here. No Wi-Fi, no lattes, no door locks. I think the guy heats his bathwater with firewood, and the stove is basically a campfire with a chimney." She paused, glancing back at the cabin. "He's nice, I guess. Polite. Probably grew up talking to deer or something. But I swear, Maddie, if I stay here one more night, I might start churning butter and naming squirrels." She laughed, loud and carelessly. What she didn't hear was the creak of the screen door opening behind her. What she didn't see was Lucas, stepping out with a bowl of leftover stew for the porch cats, stopping short as her words drifted through the rain. He stood there, just for a moment, his expression unreadable. Her laughter rolled on, oblivious. Then, Quietly, he turned and walked back inside. When Emily finally ended the call, sighing into the rain, she felt a twinge of something in the air. Something had shifted. She just couldn't name it yet. She stepped back inside, wiping water from her face. Wenjifers, Lucas was at the sink, silent. He didn't look up, didn't smile. The fire crackled between them. Wenjifers. Emily hesitated, then took her mug from earlier and sat on the couch. She sipped in silence, watching his back, wondering what had changed. Ben, she didn't know he'd heard every word. Not yet, but something had cracked, quietly, painfully, in the space between them. The storm passed by morning, leaving behind a sky washed in pale blue and a forest floor slick with dew. Birds chirped cautiously from the trees. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in soft golden rays. Emily stood on the porch, arms crossed, mug in hand. The quiet pressed in too much. No honking horns, no notifications, no schedule. Just the hum of insects and the distant rustle of leaves. After breakfast, barely touched, she told Lucas she needed air and slipped out alone. She walked past the garden, past the chicken coop, her expensive boots now caked in dirt. A narrow trail led beyond the edge of the trees, winding like an invitation. She followed it, phone still useless in her pocket. Ooh! The forest was different than she expected. It wasn't oppressive, it was alive. Wildflowers pushed through underbrush, butterflies flitted between branches, and somewhere above, a hawk called sharply. For a moment, Emily let herself feel it. Peace. Then her foot slid. She had stepped on loose gravel at the edge of a steep drop. Her ankle twisted hard as the ground gave way beneath her. She let out a cry, tumbling into the ravine. She landed between jagged rocks, her breath knocked out of her. Pain exploded in her ankle. When she tried to sit up, she screamed. Her foot was wedged tightly between two stones. Her palms were scraped raw. Blood trickled down her shin. Dirt smeared her face. "Hello!" she shouted. Her voice echoed. "Is anyone there?" Nothing. She screamed again, louder. Again, no answer. Panic clawed at her ribs. Her heart raced. Sweat mixed with tears as she pulled, yanked. Nothing. The pain was blinding. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Someone. Anyone." Time passed in a blur of pain and heat. She didn't know how long she lay there. Minutes? Hours? Then, footsteps. Crunching through the underbrush. A voice. "Emily!" She lifted her head weakly. Lucas. He was already moving, sliding down the ravine, eyes wide with fear and fury. "I've got you," he said, kneeling beside her. "My foot," she whispered. "It's stuck." His hands moved with steady urgency, examining the angle, the pressure point. Then, with a grunt, he freed her foot from the rocks. She cried out, biting her lip to keep from sobbing. I know," he said gently. "Hold on." He didn't wait for permission. He scooped her up, holding her against his chest. The climb was slow, the path slick, but he never stumbled, never let her fall. Back at the cabin, Lucas carried her straight to the spare room. Ruth, his older cousin, hurried in with towels and bandages. Lucas cleaned every wound, iced her ankle, and covered her with a quilt. She didn't speak. She couldn't. But before her eyes fluttered shut, she saw him, sitting beside her, dirt still under his nails, his jaw clenched tight. He hadn't said a word about what she'd said on the porch. But in that moment, she knew he had heard everything, and he'd come anyway. The pain dulled by morning, but the quiet hadn't. Emily woke to the scent of lavender and soap, sunlight streaming through the window in a golden hush. Her foot was propped up with pillows. A tray sat nearby with tea, toast, and a small jar of homemade jam, streaming to the wee. She blinked. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she saw Lucas, still in the chair beside her, arms folded, head bowed in sleep. His shirt was wrinkled, his boots muddy, and dirt still lined the edges of his fingernails. He had stayed. A lump rose in her throat. "Imai." When he stirred and their eyes met, she tried to speak, but nothing came. Finally, she whispered, "Thank you." Lucas nodded, his voice quiet. "That's enough. No lecture, no accusation, no guilt, just kindness." Fulness. The days that followed passed differently. Emily couldn't walk far, so the world slowed around her. Ruth brought her warm meals, always simple but comforting. Lucas checked her ankle, fetched firewood, and sometimes sat nearby, whittling something wordless out of wood. And Emily began to see. She noticed how Lucas rose before dawn to water the garden like it was sacred, how he delivered baskets of vegetables to neighbors without being asked, how he listened more than he spoke, and how the kids from nearby farms came running just to help him fix a fence or swing from a rope tied to an old tree. She found herself wanting to be part of it. One morning she hobbled into the kitchen before anyone else was up. The stove was cold. On the counter sat a bowl of eggs, a jar of honey, and a note from Ruth. "Thought you might like to try." Emily stared at it. Then slowly, almost nervously, she opened the battered old cookbook nearby. No glossy photos, just faded ink and pencil scribbles. She traced a recipe for scones with her finger. It took nearly 2 hours. The first batch burned. The second collapsed. Mise. But the third? Golden. Imperfect. Hers? When Ruth entered and saw the tray, she gasped. "Did you make these?" Emily shrugged. "I tried. Don't get too excited." Lucas wandered in minutes later. He picked up a scone, bit into it, and gave a simple nod. "You might just pass for a mountain girl yet." Emily rolled her eyes, but smiled. Something had shifted. Not in the world. In her, she wasn't just recovering, she was becoming. How are you feeling about the story so far? I'd really love to know what you think. Did it touch your heart or maybe remind you of something from your own life? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And while you're at it, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? I'd love to see how far this story travels. The sun was still rising when the sleek black SUV rolled up the dirt driveway, its tinted windows reflecting the pine trees and the faded barn beyond. The vehicle looked like it had been dropped from another world, a polished machine among chickens and mud. Lucas stood at the barn door, a coil of rope in one hand, brow furrowed. Emily stepped onto the porch with a limp, wiping flour from her fingers just as the car door opened and her mother stepped out. Miranda Carter was elegance sharpened into steel. Designer coat, silk scarf, hair in a tight twist. Her heels sank slightly into the dirt, but she didn't flinch. She only narrowed her eyes at the surroundings. "Emily," she said, her voice cold and clipped. "What is this place?" Emily exhaled. "Morning, Mom." Miranda's gaze swept the yard. The clothesline, the old swing, the mismatched chairs. Then to her daughter's scuffed jeans and flour-dusted sweater. "What on earth are you wearing?" Emily looked down. "Comfortable. Get your things. We're leaving." "I'm not," Emily said calmly. Miranda stiffened. "You've made your point. You ran away. You got muddy. Time to come home." "This is home," Emily replied. Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "You weren't raised for this kind of life. You belong in Manhattan, not in a wooden cabin with a man who probably doesn't even own a necktie." Lucas remained silent on the porch, his jaw tightening just slightly. Emily stepped closer. "He's the one who picked me up when I couldn't walk, who didn't flinch when I was bleeding or broken, who never once tried to control me." Miranda scoffed. "Control? Emily, everything you have, your car, your education, your safety, was because I controlled the chaos." Emily nodded slowly. "And in doing that, you made me terrified of living." Silence fell between them. Then Miranda reached into her purse, pulled out her phone. "I'm calling a car. I'm not leaving you here. I'm not asking you to," Emily replied. She turned to Lucas, stepping closer. "But I need to leave, not because I want to go back, because I need to face things, on my terms." Lucas didn't protest. He only nodded. Emily turned back to her mother. "Give me a few days. I'll meet you in the city. But this is part of who I am now. And if you can't see that, then maybe you never really saw me at all." Her mother said nothing. And for the first time in her life, Emily wasn't afraid of the silence. Emily packed slowly, folding each borrowed shirt and cotton dress like she was afraid they might disappear if she rushed. Her suitcase sat half full on the bed. She glanced around the room, the faded curtains, the chipped mug on the windowsill, the faint scent of rosemary from the garden below. Lucas leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, saying nothing. "I told her I'd come back," Emily said softly, not meeting his eyes. "Not for her. For me." Lucas nodded once. "You don't owe me an explanation." "I know," she whispered, "but I owe me one." The morning was too quiet as they walked to the porch. Ruth gave her a tight hug, slipped a wrapped scone into her bag, and wiped her eyes before pretending she wasn't crying. The kids from the nearby houses waved from the fence, holding up paper drawings labeled Miss Emily in messy crayon. Emily swallowed hard. At the gate, she turned to Lucas. "I'm not running," she said. "I know. I just need to know that if I choose this life, it's because I chose it, not because I got stuck and convinced myself it was enough." Lucas stepped forward, brushing a lock of hair from her cheek. "You'll figure it out. You always had more grit than you thought." She smiled through the sting behind her eyes. "You make it too easy to stay. Then maybe that's how you'll know it's real." She reached for his hand, holding it just a moment longer than needed. Then she let go, stepped through the gate, and climbed into the waiting SUV. The engine started. Dust curled around the tires. The car disappeared slowly down the long dirt road. Lucas stood still, watching until the silence returned. Then Stowe. He didn't go back inside right away. He sat on the porch, elbows on his knees, and stared at the horizon. It wasn't a goodbye. Not yet. But it was something close. Something unfinished. The city felt sharper than Emily remembered. Glass towers, blaring horns, and the constant hum of lives rushing by. Her heels clicked against polished marble as she walked into the family's downtown office building. She passed assistants who blinked in surprise, past the mirrored elevator doors that once reflected a girl who didn't know how to say no. Now, she did. Her mother was waiting in the boardroom. So was the family lawyer. Emily sat down, setting a plain envelope on the table. "I'm not here for a seat at the table," she said. "I'm not here for shares or approval." Miranda leaned back. "Then why are you here?" "To say this in person," Emily replied. "From now on, my life is mine. No more surveillance. No more rescue teams. No more people showing up in trucks when I haven't asked to be saved." Silence stretched. Her mother's gaze narrowed. "You've changed." "No," Emily said. "I've grown." That night, alone in her apartment, she opened her laptop. The skyline blinked outside the window like a city full of questions. She began to type, not for likes or press releases, but because the words inside her finally had somewhere to go. The post was titled, "The Girl Who Hated Dirt Until She Learned to Grow Something." She wrote about the tire, the cabin, the ravine, about scones and silence, and how sometimes healing doesn't come with headlines. It comes with wooden spoons and muddy boots. She clicked post. Then she closed the laptop and exhaled. And Polly. She didn't expect what came next. And Polly. Thousands of comments, messages from strangers. People who'd left cities, who'd found themselves in places they never meant to be. People asking, "Is he real? Where is this place? Did you stay?" But one message stood out. "Lucas Hayes shared your post." Her heart stumbled as she clicked his profile. His caption was only one line. "I read this 3 times. Still doesn't feel real, but I'm glad you remembered the way the rain smelled." Emily didn't hesitate. She packed a bag, not with heels or plans, but with jeans and her old sweater. She bought a bus ticket. No car, no driver, just her. 2 days later, the dust stuck to her boots as she stepped off the bus. Mojazbalka. The road felt familiar under her feet. The trees leaned in like old friends. The mailbox still leaned to the left, and when she reached the gate of the farmhouse, he was there. Lucas stood on the porch, wrench in hand, confusion on his face turning to something slower. Deeper. "I'm not here because I have nowhere else to go," Emily said. She stepped through the gate. "I'm here because I want to stay." Lucas didn't move at first. He just looked at her, really looked, like he was afraid she might disappear if he blinked. Emily stood at the gate, her hair windblown, jeans dusty, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder. No makeup, no performance. Just her. He finally set the wrench down and walked down the porch steps. "New." "You sure?" he asked, voice low. She nodded. No, I'm not sure of anything, except how I feel when I'm here. He didn't ask for more. He didn't need to. He simply reached out and took her hand. Hoga? This time, she didn't flinch. Hoga? This time, she didn't run. Hoga? They stood together in the yard as the evening sun sank low, casting golden light across the field. Chickens clucked softly in the distance. A breeze lifted the edge of her shirt. Everything was quiet, and yet everything inside her was alive. The next few weeks unfolded like petals in slow bloom. Emily didn't return to the city. She stayed. First for days, then weeks. She started helping with chores, slowly at first. Feeding the chickens, weeding the garden, learning the difference between sage and mint. The dirt that once felt foreign now felt grounding. One morning she painted a wooden sign and hung it on the old barn. The rooted life. It wasn't just a farm anymore. It became a retreat. For families, kids, tired souls from the city looking to remember something they'd forgotten. There were hay rides, flower picking, and a bake-your-own scone station that quickly became the most popular attraction. Emily handled the branding, the stories. Her voice wove through their new website, their flyers, their handwritten notes tucked into jars of jam. People came for the novelty. They stayed for the honesty. Children followed Emily like ducklings, calling her Miss Root at first, until one day a flower-covered little girl shouted, "Miss Scone." The name stuck. Emily laughed and wore it like a badge of honor. She still missed some things, like oat milk, sushi, and hot showers that didn't require patience. But what she had now? It was real. It was hers. The old barn had never seen so much laughter. Fairy lights hung from its beams like fireflies frozen in midair. Hand-painted signs pointed to wildflower trails, apple-picking spots, and a crooked table where kids shaped scones with sticky fingers and flour-smeared cheeks. What had once been a forgotten patch of land was now alive, because of her. Emily walked the grounds barefoot, her skirt swaying with the breeze. She stopped to refill lemonade jars, helped toddlers plant marigolds in chipped mugs, and taught a group of teens how to find constellations from the picnic bench behind the greenhouse. The girl who once shrieked at dirt now kept a compost journal. Lucas worked beside her every day, fixing fences, teaching guests how to harvest tomatoes, and never failing to bring her a cold drink exactly when she needed it. His quiet steadiness became the pulse of the place. The two of them worked in rhythm. She spoke, he listened, she dreamed, he built. They weren't just building a farm, they were building a life. One afternoon, after the last car had left and the sun dipped low, Emily sat under the same oak tree where she'd once grumbled about bugs. A jar of blackberry jam rested in her lap, her toes brushed the grass, the scent of rosemary and soil drifted on the wind. Lucas approached, carrying 2 mason jars of lemonade. She smiled as he handed her one. "Tell me this isn't real, just so I can appreciate it all over again." He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "It's real." They watched the field sway under the fading light, the fireflies beginning to blink alive. Then Lucas stood and offered his hand. "Come with me." Emily raised an eyebrow but took it. They walked quietly, hand in hand, through the garden, past the rows of vegetables and down a narrow path toward the edge of the property. She recognized the place instantly. The ravine. The one where she'd fallen. Only now there was a wooden bench overlooking it. Wildflowers had been planted along the rim. Butterflies danced between the blooms. She stopped, breath-catching. "You brought me here on purpose," she whispered. Lucas nodded. "I did." They stood in silence, the same silence that had once terrified her but now felt like truth. She looked at the rocks below and then up at him. "If I hadn't fallen, I might never have found you," he finished softly. She smiled, eyes shimmering. "Part of me needed to fall," she whispered. He squeezed her hand. "And part of me needed to catch you." They sat on the bench as twilight painted the sky in lavender and gold. No declarations, no dramatic music, just the rustle of leaves, the warmth of a shared quiet, and a love that had grown, like everything else on the farm, from the ground up. The sky glowed soft and golden as music drifted gently across the field. faint strings from an old speaker, woven with birdsong and the rustle of pine branches above. Beneath a canopy of wildflowers and twinkling lights strung from wooden posts, rows of hay bales formed a simple aisle. There were no golden arches, no designer ice sculptures, no glossy magazine spreads. But there was laughter, there was love. Emily stepped into the clearing barefoot, the hem of her linen dress brushing the tops of the grass. She had sewn the gown herself from fabric bought at the small store in town. It didn't shimmer, didn't cinch, didn't dazzle, but it moved like air, and it was hers. She held a bouquet of lavender, wheat, and wild daisies. Her hair was pinned loosely, tendrils falling around her shoulders the way Lucas liked best. She met his eyes and never looked away. Lucas stood at the altar in a vest Ruth had ironed that morning and his cleanest boots. His hair was still damp from a rushed wash, and there was a bit of soil beneath his nails. He'd insisted on fixing a garden trellis even that morning. The guests weren't billionaires or politicians. They were the mailman, the baker, a group of kids who once learned from Emily how to knead dough and not be afraid of bees. Neighbors brought everything, from folding chairs to jam jars. Everyone had offered something. The officiant, a retired librarian from a nearby town, stood with a smile. "Are we ready?" she asked. Emily nodded, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "I spent so much of my life searching for more," she began. "More money, more titles, more proof that I mattered. But somehow, I found everything I ever wanted in a place I once called nowhere." Lucas took her hands. "You made this place new again," he said. "You gave me something I didn't know I was waiting for. Someone who saw worth in quiet things." They exchanged simple rings, homemade vows, and one kiss that was met with the clatter of tin pans from the barn, a tradition Ruth insisted on reviving for good luck. As the sun dipped and twilight gathered, the long tables filled with home-cooked dishes. Mason jars clinked. Kids chased fireflies. The fields echoed with stories and music and warmth. And in the center of it all, Emily sat beside Lucas, her head on his shoulder, the stars blooming above them like blessings. Night had fully fallen, wrapping the world in deep velvet blue stitched with stars. Fireflies blinked across the field like tiny lanterns, while laughter echoed from the barn where children danced barefoot and neighbors passed around pie. Emily sat at a long wooden table, her apron still dusted in flour, her cheeks pink from both the cool breeze and quiet joy. Lucas sat beside her, fingers loosely laced with hers, his other arm resting behind her on the bench. Ruth laughed with the kids down the table, passing out slices of honey cornbread and sweet tea. Emily looked around. This place she once wanted to escape had become everything. She leaned her head against Lucas's shoulder and whispered, "I used to think I'd marry a millionaire." He glanced down at her, smiling but saying nothing. "I thought I needed power, a name, a penthouse, someone with influence and a driver," she continued. "But I chose a man who plants love into the earth one seed at a time." Lucas kissed her temple gently. "And you made it all bloom." They sat in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Just the rustling of leaves, the low murmur of conversations, and the soft strum of a guitar someone had started playing near the garden beds. Emily closed her eyes. She remembered the first night, mud on her heels, thunder in the sky, and that flat tire that rerouted her entire life. She remembered the fall into the ravine, the sting of words said too carelessly, the first scone she ever baked, the first time she held Lucas's hand. And now, here, surrounded by neighbors and laughter and stars, they weren't just surviving, they were rooted, they were growing, and they were home. Because home, she had learned, wasn't where you came from. It was where you chose to stay. If this story moved you, reminded you that healing is real, or renewed your belief in second chances, we invite you to subscribe to Healing Stories. Here, we share real-life journeys of strength, love, and hope. Stories that speak straight to the soul. Thank you for being here. And always remember, no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back to the light. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know.